Hello, and welcome back to Redefine Parenting. I'm Veenu Keller, and I'm going to be your host today. I wanted to welcome you to Spanglish World Network and her network on Zingo TV, channels 250 and 251. Please remember to download both the Zingo TV app on the respective app stores on iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure to rate and leave a comment. This app is free. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire and Fire Sticks, Roku Sticks, and all smart TVs 2016 and forward. Today, I'm really excited to have a special guest. I say everyone's my special guest, but this one specifically. She is one of my dearest friends. She works for my company, Veenu Inpires, as another family coach, and also specializes in helping people to set up their homeschool for their kids. And I thought this is a great topic. I was just talking to the producer of my show, and he was saying how, Canada's going back to homeschooling because of COVID and monkeypox and who knows what else, right? But the fact is that it's happening. So I have learned through this whole thing of the pandemic a couple years ago that it's not about fighting what's going on. It doesn't matter about the opinion. The fact is, what do we need to do to support our kids? Mm-hmm. I've talked about several times, several shows about how if we're stressed out and what we're dealing with, how is our kids dealing with it? They don't have the mind capacity, the mind growth to even fathom what's really going on in the long-term effects. So one of the things that happened during COVID when we had to go into homeschool, I don't know how many listeners are out there, but I freaked out. I was like, how am I going to do this? I have to work and my husband has to work. And what are we going to do? And, my kids have dyslexia, they have ADHD. And all these beliefs started going how am I going to support their special needs? Am I equipped to support their special needs? Are they going to get further behind than they already are? And all these doubts came into my mind about homeschool. And then I thought, well, how, homeschool, these kids don't socialize. They can't play sports. I had all these different beliefs that started to come up. The ironic part of this was when I found out I was pregnant with twins 10 years ago, my husband and I already decided, we're like, we got to homeschool because there's no way we're going to put them in the public schools because I had already had two boys that had gone through public school and I saw the education they had. It's not great. They don't know how to write cursive. My oldest son didn't know that a signature was cursive for the longest time. It's like, wow. And we just push them through the system and then we send them off into the world to do something. And so when I found out I was pregnant with twins, I was like, oh, we got to homeschool. So again, I started to think, oh, but is it going to be good for socialization? Working mental health for so many years, I always thought about the social emotional part of a child and how important that is. And I had this stigma, if you would, that if we homeschool, how are we going to integrate this? And then all of a sudden I've started hearing about homeschool co-ops and all this other stuff. And we did find an amazing private school that my kids go to. And their school's amazing. I can't say enough about it, which I felt saved me from trying to figure out homeschool. But then I talked to my amazing friend, Sam, about homeschool because she's been homeschooling her kids for years, very successful. Her kids are beyond the age they should be in school. And I started talking to her. And what's great is that now, after being with Sam for so long and talking to her, if I had to go back to homeschool, I could do it with a lot of courage and a lot of knowledge so I can set my kids up to win. So I wanted to bring Sam on to kind of talk about, just to have this real raw discussion, because I am sure what I've said, Sam, is not unusual. I'm sure you've heard this too many times.
Time and time again. and even in the elevator, you homeschool? Well, what happens to their socialization? Well, you were just talking to my kids and they were just fine with you until you realized they were homeschooled. So it's a very common misconception about homeschool, that they don't get any kind of social aspect. They get social anywhere you go. You go to the grocery store and they talk to the people in line or they talk to the person at the register. If they play sports with the kids in the neighborhood, with their grandparents. So they're learning to socialize and social with people of various ages and different backgrounds. And I think it's even better than what they would get in school, because when you're in school, you get in trouble for socializing.
Right.
You get scolded. School is for school. It's for learning, and it's not for, talking to your friend, even though that exists and it's there. Um, yeah, it's interesting that that's like the very first thing that comes up with people.
So how do you feel people actually, I mean, we saw in the pandemic, a lot of people went to homeschool like me, they got scared, they did what they had to do. And then all of a sudden school's open and everybody's like, oh my gosh, thank God school's open. I could get my life back. And yet how many parents opted to stay in homeschool? They opted to do the virtual learning and everything. So before the pandemic, what is the mindset like, what made you get your kids into homeschool? I mean, you and I were just talking about it. I said, "Oh, I thought you guys just already had this plan." You're like, "No, we didn't have this plan." So, just for our
Yeah.
listeners, can you just tell us your journey?
Not at all. So it's interesting as my sister homeschooled her boys just for a little bit because they were diagnosed with ADD. And back then, I think
Right.
now it's ADHD. I don't know which letters there are, but she was not willing to put them on medication. So she brought them home to homeschool, and then they went back into traditional school. And I saw that. I'm like, there's no way. There's no way. She had 3 boys, and that freaked me out. But when Emma was 4.5, we were still renting and we didn't know where we were going to end up living. And so we didn't want to move them from school to school to school, right? District. And so we knew that where Felix worked, we could go to that school district and have her tested to see which grade she would go into. And they tested her. Now remember, she's 4.5. They tested her first grade level. And we were like, "Oh, wow." And then they said, "Okay, so we're gonna put her into TK," or some people might know it as pre-K, pre-kinder, before kindergarten. And we were dumbfounded. I was like, "Why would you do that? I mean, she'll be bored to tears. She's already showed skill enough to be in the first grade." And they said, "Well, socially, we don't think that she could handle it."
Mm,
And they had not met my daughter yet.
mm,
And you knew Emma at that age, and,
yes,
like, she was a little social butterfly. I mean, we would go to the teenage camp and, the she would be, like, talking to everybody. So, socially, she was just fine, but they had this preconceived notion that at that specific age, she couldn't handle it. And
right.
so we decided, "You know what? I don't want her to get into a situation where she's bored, and that creates a whole myriad of different problems, right?" So we're
Yes.
like, "Let's just keep doing what we're doing." And we did, and we haven't stopped. And she is going to be 15 in October.
Oh my God. Let me just take that in for a moment. That she's going to be 15.
I
Because I
know.
do remember her, at even 3, I think, or, younger. And
Yeah.
she always just fit in like one of the big kids. Like
Yeah.
she was there, she was socializing, she could have a full conversation with you. It was like, how old is she? So now she's going to be 15. That's just really, really crazy. And you're right. Like, I mean, that whole, again, I bring up that whole social thing, right? It's
Yeah.
she's not socially ready, and homeschool doesn't give them the socialization that they need. It's like, so obviously socialization is on our mind. How now? So what grade is she in now?
So technically, she's going into her freshman year. She has tested out of high school English. She is starting geometry, so she's like sophomore year math.
Wow.
Her reading is off the charts. It just because we go at her pace, at her
Hmm.
level, and her interests, and so there's no resistance. Like she's like, "Mom, when are we gonna start school again? When are we gonna start?" What
Ready.
kids don't do that other than, they wanna get back to their friends, but she's like, "I wanna learn."
Right.
And it's a beautiful thing. She's excited. She's passionate about learning.
So I know that she's very social still, and she has lots of friends and she does a lot of things. But for our listeners, how have you managed, to debunk that homeschooling takes away socialization?
Well, we have a lot of, I guess, extracurricular activities. So we have a co-op that we had worked with. I created a monthly book club where we have kids come to the house and, they discuss these books on a level that I never would have at that age, where they're like big, juicy conversations about the topics that are in the books.
Wow.
And then, they play sports. So they have a team sport they're involved in.
Mm.
They have friends in the neighborhood that they hang out with, and they're all different ages. And then our church, we do a lot of stuff with our church. So, you know, and that's another thing is like a lot of people think, oh, you're homeschooling because of your religious beliefs. Nope. Has nothing to do with it. Nothing at all. So and yeah, and Max too. Max is gonna he's 12. Um and they both learn differently,
Hmm.
but they do both love reading. They love to be read to, and I think that that brings up a lot of conversations that we have together, and helps them grow.
I love it. I love it. And I remember I reached out to you when the twins got first diagnosed with dyslexia. Like, how could I support them more? And, there were so many homeschool books that you had referred to me. Like, look, she's an artist. So, like, the first thing, Sam did was ask me, like, what is Sage into? And, Sam has met Sage, so she knows that she's into arts and crafts. She likes to draw, she likes to color, kind of like Emma.
Mhm.
And, so she's like, great, I know this great book that, it's going to be like an arts and crafts book where she gets to color and do all these different things to bring out the artistic in her. So she wants to do it. And yet she's going to be learning at the same time.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
I thought that was incredible. We did have somebody that was in one of the comments about ADHD and ADD, and I just wanted to specify that. So ADD, when Sam was talking about it, was a true diagnosis back in the 80s and 90s. The
Yeah,
DSM-4 changed it to just ADHD, and there's three types. So you have the ADHD type 1, which, and don't quote me on this because I don't know the order of it, but one is ADHD type 1 where it's just the hyperactive. And then type 2 is ADHD type 2 is the attentiveness, like the attention deficit.
right.
And then type 3 is the combined, where you have the hyperactivity and the attention deficit. So, my children have both, like they have the combined and plus dyslexia, which is interesting because we can dive even more into that. And I'll probably bring another friend on to talk about, dyslexia, because she was my go-to when my kids got diagnosed. But some of the same symptoms of ADHD mirror what kids with dyslexia portray in their behaviors, right?
Right.
They frustration, they can't stay attentive, but their brain's not processing it the same way. One of the things that I loved about talking to you, Sam, when the twins got first diagnosed is that even in homeschool, you can tailor it to how they learn, what they learn about.
Absolutely, and because everybody has a different learning style. There's a way that each of us learn. So my nephew, like I said, that he got diagnosed, he had to move in order to absorb what was being taught him. And so I said to my sister, I said, "Get him on the treadmill.
Mm,
Get him on the treadmill and he could have an audiobook or read." And then suddenly his grades were doing so well because he was able to move. And so
mm,
often when you're in a regular classroom, they get upset with that. And I have to admit, Max is very active when we learn. I'm used to, and I grew up with a brick and mortar school where you have to sit in your seat, and
mhm.
not only that, I got taught by the nuns, so it was even more strict, right? So and I was used to that, and it's taken me time to get over that, or to quote unquote de-school myself so that
Right,
I'm not so rigid and know that he is learning. I mean, like he'll be in, like we'll go to church and I see him moving around and inside I'm going, "Oh no, what are people thinking?" Right?
right.
And we get home and he starts talking to me about the message. So
Mm,
he really heard it. The movement just helps them. And it's getting past that, and again, learning what their learning styles are. Some people are auditory, they do better just listening. Some people are better kinesthetic, they have to touch things in order to learn.
right.
That's why you have like manipulatives with math, and it helps people learn math better. Some people are just visual learners. You have videos that they can watch and they get it like this?
Hmm.
So there's so many different ways to learn, and you've got to also know what is your way of teaching and how do you blend the two.
Right. So, it's interesting because the twins were very lucky when they first got diagnosed. They were in a combination class, second and third grade. And we held them back because we realized when we got them tested that they were 6 levels below their reading level.
Mhm.
And it was, so difficult for them. And here I'm struggling, my husband's struggling because my husband had dyslexia as well. And so he's like, I don't know how to help them, like, what do we do? And I said, well, we're going to figure this out. We have to figure out how they're going to learn. And
Mhm.
so we held them back in second grade with this amazing teacher. And I say amazing because you described what she does. Like, she had stations where, do you want to sit on a ball? Do you want to sit at a desk? Do you want to sit on the carpet? She had standing desks, right? So she gave these kids an opportunity to learn because there are kids that do want to sit at that table and that's
Mhm.
how they learn the best. So
Mhm.
great. She had that opportunity. She had a sensory area where, like, if you just needed to go and take a minute and just kind of, feel some stuff or whatever. And I loved, loved, loved that teacher. And my twins had her for 2 years at this private school that we're at. And my twin boy, I would say my one son because I have three of them, but this one, the twin, he actually, they both actually went 6 reading levels. They got caught up. We got them some extra tutoring through an amazing company. And he wanted to stay with his friend so bad, he didn't do second grade again. Like, she gave him third grade work. And so people always ask me, they're like, what? Because I'll say, oh, they're in fourth and fifth this year. They're like, but they're twins. And I'm like, yep. And they said, well, how could you do that? Like, why would you separate them? And I said, it's kind of that feeling that you had, I think, when you heard Emma was at a first grade level at 4.5, and they wanted to put her in a pre-K instead of setting her up to win
Yep.
intellectually. And
Yep.
I said, well, I had an option. The principal is amazing at the school too. She's an educator. And so she pulled me in and she says, look, I get all about behaviors. Please trust me. I know about education. And I said, absolutely. That's why we're here. And she says, I know you and your goal is to set your kids up to win. And if you want, we can hold them back together or we can allow Sam to keep going. And I said, we will set them up to win. So you guys tell me where my twins are at. And so Sage fell a year behind him. And they happen to be in the same classes because they're combination classes, but Sage is doing fourth grade this year work and Sam is doing fifth grade this year.
Mhm.
And my husband and I, we talked about it, and we both take a lot of pride in saying it's not what society thinks of us or if what we did was good or bad. We did the best that we could as parents to know that we're setting our kids up to win and keeping them at the level that they need to be at to be who they are as an individual, not who at their age they should be like this. Oh, they're twins. They should be together. And now as they're getting older, what I'm realizing is we actually did them a service because
Yeah.
now each of them will have their own graduation. They'll have their own prom. They'll have their own individuality because as twins, they kind of get stuck together all the time,
Yep.
you know, and it's like, when did they leave their rooms? Like, when did we separate them? When they told us, when they're like, I want my own room. I don't want to be with her. Great.
Yeah.
It's time to have your own room then. And they have the same birthdays. And now Sam's like, well, do you think that we can have different days when we celebrate? I'm like, you're pushing it. Okay. You're pushing it. Um, but it shows me that even with education, it's looking at how do we set our kids up to win?
Yeah.
And we stay at this school because of the type of school it is. They look at our children and say, how do they best learn? What do they need to learn the best? Do they need to stand up?
Well, from what I'm hearing is that they look at them as individuals.
Yes.
They don't look at them as a number, as numbers, right? And I feel like, and it makes me sad because, there's good and there's bad to both, right? There's good and there's bad in the public school system. There's a good and bad in homeschool. And I feel like, there's nothing wrong with going to a public school. absolutely nothing and making it, the most you can. And sometimes, there are gaps that need to be filled, and parents can do that when the kids get home. And in essence, you're still homeschooling. They
Mhm.
just get to go and be in a classroom longer during the day. But like, it made me think of it. It's like, you question your parenting and whether or
Right.
not you're doing a good job. And I immediately pulled this out because it's something that I post up, and it's like, there's no way to be a perfect mother, and you can put parent in there, right? But a million ways to be a good one. And
Mm.
making good choices for your kids, knowing, and hoping what the outcome is going to be. That's it. That, it's not about
Yes.
being perfect. It's about finding the good different ways.
It's so funny because that was actually my newsletter that got sent out today. I did a blog on the imperfect, perfect parent.
You're right.
And I mean, because that's what we're doing, I mean, for the longest time, I beat myself up because we put our children, our twins, into the Spanish immersion, thinking like, hey, this is going to help their brain grow. And I know that I was trying to set them up to win as an early childhood specialist, developmental specialist. I worked with the twins because they were premature, so they never were behind. They always met their markers because I knew how to work with them. That's what I did for a living. But I also knew that if something was truly a deficit in their life, it was going to show up in school, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Because you can't teach that, right? When their brain is not absorbing it in that area of the brain, you can't even fake it to make it, and it was very obvious.
Yeah.
And instead of beating myself up, you know I learned that I did the best that I could with what I knew.
Mhm.
And and I'm happy to say that now my children understand Spanish, even though we took them out of it, but like, they get it, they hear it, they've heard it for so long. So as much as we think we're doing a disservice to our kids, sometimes we're really not. Like, let it
Absolutely.
play out and find the gift you
Yeah.
know um Speaking of gifts, one of the things that I always said, if I homeschool, if it ever comes down to it, Samantha's the girl to go to, because how she's learned how to develop this. So I was going to put in the comments menu, but I don't know if people would understand that. And you make these menus for each grade, so it's that curriculum stuff. So can you just explain to parents, especially those that are getting into it, like, what is a menu?
So it's not really a menu per se, but I spend a good chunk of the summer getting prepared for the school year coming up. And a lot of it has to do with conversations that I have with the kids and finding out what their passions are. They do have a say in what we begin to learn.
Mm.
Um, and then I pick the curriculum. So so like I have it's, I guess you'd say, it's the menu, our curriculum choices. This is from last year. And I have, color coded right over here what we do individually and what they do together. And then I have it all laid out here. Then I'm I guess a type A personality because everything is color coordinated and it's in a spiral binder, and I have everything, in a binder like this where I have specifically, I've got our mission statement in there, what we're doing for history, the different loops that we do. Now, let me tell you this. You're like, loops, what? Um, there's different ways to schedule your days with homeschool. You can have it block, which means you've blocked out a specific amount of time. And for me, for us, I've tried all of them. But we got limited, so if you've got your block set up so that between 9 and 10, it's very similar to traditional school, right? So between 9 and 10, we're going to cover history. But what happens if you start going down a rabbit trail and they get excited about a subject? You don't want to cut that off.
Right.
And so that's why we started doing a loop schedule. So as soon as you're done with that particular subject, then you pick up the next subject and you pick up the next day where you left off. And then you continue on that loop. And so we have loops for, here, so like for our math. last year. If you see math, and then we have it goes into a read aloud, then it goes to writing, then it goes to grammar, then it goes to memory work, then it goes up to exercise. I do include exercise. And that's like together what we do daily. This is our daily loop. And then uh going into, like, say if we were to do our writing loop, I would go into our writing loop, and in our writing loop you can see I've got, a brave writer project. We do copy work, there's creative writer, and then free write. And you'll
Mm,
see games in between, because I feel like kids learn so much
yes.
from games. I mean, there's so many educational games. Like, I have a huge box. I'm looking at it right now. You're like, why are you looking over there? But like bananagrams, that's a fun game to play, and improving their vocabulary and their spelling. Then we've got like listography, writing, and again, learning their uh, I guess spelling and vocabulary. I've got so many different games for
That's
each subject.
it's funny. I mean, learning can be fun, and that's exactly what you do.
Mm,
You bring it in and you bring in their interest, and that's what I love. You
yeah,
bring in, I remember we had a client that we were working together with, and her parents were not a fan of homeschool.
yeah.
And I said, okay, well, let's get on a call and let's hear them. Let's hear what they don't want. And let's hear what's their outcome for their kids. What's their educational outcome overall? Where do they want to see their child? And, after a call with us, they decided homeschool was the way to go. And our client, and I mean, you can comment on this, but she thrived. Like
She
she
did.
emotionally, she thrived socially. Her
Yeah,
grades were great. I mean, she took responsibility. Like she took
she really
ownership
did.
of
And I
where
have to say I was proud.
yes,
I
yes.
was.
And she's starting to go back into it. And I said, how do you feel? And you know what she said? She says, Miss Sam set me up to win. I think I got this year. Like, because she already has it, right? You helped her set up her menu. You organized her days with her. She checked in with you. And because it was so repetitious for the school year, she's like, Miss Sam set me up to win. Like, I know I got this. And if I don't, then I know who to call, right? So, you know, and that just speaks highly of what you do. And this is part of the coaching that you offer. The homeschool coaching is helping people to understand and navigate, if you would, through the laws of their state, because she was in a different state. So I know that you helped look up that stuff as well, and then helping to set up like a menu. And it's interesting because I know that you and I had this whole beautiful idea of what we were going to do because she had all these interests, and then all of a sudden the school's like, no, not so much. You could do homeschool, but it has to be this program. And so I know hours of time you went back to the drawing board.
I know. Well, and here's the thing is, like, even if they give you specifics, if your state has specifics, you can work within that structure and still make it exciting, still make learning exciting, and with their passions. You know, if so, one of the things that I know she had to do, she had to write a paper. And so she wrote it on somebody that she idolizes and thinks is wonderful. Oh my gosh, it just flowed. And the instructor was
Mm,
really impressed. It's you can do it and still make it fun. It doesn't have to be so academic.
I love it. I love it. And so, what was great is when, Sam started to work with Veenu Inspires, it was just like, yes, I could do the family coaching. She's amazing at it as well. And then I was like, you know what? A lot of people want to know about homeschool. What do you think about this? And she's like, what? And I'm like, well, you really don't have to reinvent the wheel because you've been doing it with Max and Emma all these years. You already have menu set up. Like you really just, I mean, like you said, find out their interest and then plug it in.
Yeah.
So, and she's like, oh my gosh, yes. And so, Sam has created this whole curriculum through the homeschool coaching. So if you are a parent, you are a listener out there and you have questions, we can set up a call with Sam anytime, because it's really important. Again, one of the things that Sam always said is, what is your outcome for your children education wise? Don't think of like the brick and mortar or homeschool. Let's just like shelf all of how they're going to get it. Let's just talk about what is the outcome you want for them.
And I think a lot of people forget that homeschool isn't just about school.
Right.
It's about building a relationship with your kids, a foundation that's going to last a lifetime.
Yes.
It's creating an environment where learning can be exciting and not judged. And I think that's one of the biggest things for me is that relationship. And
Hmm.
you're creating an idea of what relationships can be later on in life too.
I love it. I love it. A lot of parents that I know will say, my kid's getting bullied. I'm going to pull them out of the school. I'm going to homeschool them. And, for the longest time, I was like, well, that's not going to solve the situation because that the person that's bullying obviously has some needs and they're finding a way to meet those needs through taking it out on your child. So, although that's not correct, somebody also needs to go and figure out what are these needs of this child that's doing it, and let's how to solve it. And then I say, and what is the outcome of you taking your child out? And they said, I want to keep them safe, which hands down, as a parent, that's like my first priority for my child. Are they safe? And but when you think about it, if a child is being bullied and they're scared to go to school, how effective is the education there anyway? It's
Right.
probably not. It's probably not. And so, and this was years ago, I used to think this. And so my mind started to get open and I was like, it's more than just safety. It's again giving your child the opportunity to really, be, literate, like be able to read and write, because how much are they doing that when they're scared to go to school? And so I now started to tell parents, I'm like, great. So how are you going to set it up? What do you need to know? What supports do you need in place to set that up?
Mhm.
And it's interesting because I have had other parents that I've worked with along the years that have gone by, and they too have said homeschooling has been the best journey for us. It's helped our child thrive. We found social outlets. If anything, they're more social. And
Absolutely.
we got more social. Like the parents were like, and we got more social because they joined other families
Yeah.
and do outings. And I was talking to some of the kids that I coach, and they're actually homeschooled kids. And I said, so how do you like it? They're like, it's so fun. We're constantly going out on field trips to learn about history, to learn about American history. Like my parents are taking me to Washington, D.C. because we're studying, American history. And I'm like, okay, we did not get to learn that way. We need a book that we had to read.
Yeah. There's so many outlets that you can learn even more. You start with the book and then it spreads out. So
Yeah.
there's so much you can do.
And it just, just circling back, like it does build that relationship. It builds the relationship, not just with the parents, but with themselves. It gives them back that self worth. It gives them back that I'm worth advocating for myself. Going back to the client that we had last year, I know that she was having a problem with her math teacher. And you and I both were, okay, so what do you need to do to solve it? What do you think the problem is? See it from the
Mhm.
teacher's point of view. So, what is she thinking? What's her outcome by doing this? And what is it that you want? And how can we support you in
Yeah.
advocating?
Yep.
And I think she ended up getting an A in that class, which she was
She
so
did.
afraid. That was like her lowest grade throughout the year,
It
right?
was. And I'll tell you, my mommy self wanted to reach through and strangle the teacher and go,
Right?
"Come on." But, you have to work with it. You have to work with
Right.
what you have. And I think a lot of parents feel like, "Oh, but I'm not a teacher.
Oh,
I
that was
can
me.
I
That was
can't
me.
do this.
I can't do this.
I don't know math. Well, I don't know." There's so many avenues that you can use. And here's the thing, you know, we have our kids until like they go to preschool or they go off to kindergarten in traditional school, right? You got them ready for that. They learned their alphabet, they learned their numbers, they learned how to speak. You already did it. You already do it.
Right.
You're constantly teaching them. Anytime you're in the kitchen and they're cooking with you, they're learning math, they're learning
Mm,
social skills, they're learning chemistry, all of it. So if you step back and you really look at the things that you do in your day-to-day life and that your kids observe, you're already teaching them.
Mm, I love that. And I also love the fact that, you said that you're kind of type A and organizing, but yet you're modeling also for your children that look how easy things go when you stay organized.
Yeah.
I remember my one of my older kids, he's going to be 24 this Saturday. When he was in 5th grade, his teacher says, okay, so he's an A student only because I organize him. So I looked at her and I said, so when do you want to stop doing that? And she's like, well, he's not going to have anybody organize him in middle school, and he is going to fail, is what she told me. And so as a single parent at that time, I was like, what? He's going to fail? He's been an A student all through elementary school. And I'm telling her this. And it's interesting because I did my degree in psychology. And when I was doing child psychology, it was in the book. It said at 3rd grade, it will set your children up to either love school or hate school. And this child that I'm speaking of, he had an amazing 3rd grade teacher at the public school. She was so great. I loved her. He loved her. Great relationship. And so I'm like, oh, that makes sense because look how good he's doing in 4th and 5th. And then I go to this teacher and she's like, yeah, he's only doing this because I'm organizing him. And so what happened? He started to fail in 6th, 7th, and 8th. And I'm like, oh, it's because you're not organized. It's not you're so unorganized. So instead of being able to have an open brain of what is it that he's not getting to create the F grades or D grades, I was like, because you're not organized. You're not organized. And I stayed on him all the time. You're not organized. You're not doing your binder check. You're not doing this. You're not doing that. And again, it goes back to what we say is, we're the imperfect parent, because I was definitely doing the best I could with what I knew at that time.
Sure.
Where now, fast forward with I call them my do-overs, right? My twins. When they're not doing something, when they're getting like a grade that they don't like, I ask them, what does this grade mean to you?
Yeah.
And of course, like, well, it doesn't feel good. I'm disappointed. I said, okay, let's put the feelings aside. What does this grade mean? And like, I really tried. I said, I could tell you tried. I do. And I'm so proud of you for trying. And what does this grade mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so they're like, that I don't know it. I said, exactly.
So
And
how
that's
do you know
okay.
it? How do we get you to know it?
Right. And that's the next question. So what do we need to do to get you to know it? Because I don't want my kids pushed on to the next chapter if they're not getting the fundamentals of this chapter.
Right.
We can't multiply if we didn't know how to add.
Right.
So if I got a D in adding, you're going to put me in multiplication now? Don't you think I want to be able to master the adding and the subtracting before you put me in multiplication and division? It's the basis of it, and it's, again, a different relationship. I've learned a lot to not go after the problems that other people assume is the problem.
Right.
And I can still tell you that my 24-year-old still is not organized. So I'm not running all over him to get him organized. He's figuring it out. And I know that, like, he gets so proud when he does something and it's like an organization skill. I'm like, oh, it's starting to click into you. Yay. Back about it. I don't know. And I tell all parents, grades don't mean your kids are smart or stupid, because my children
No.
are so smart. And
Absolutely.
sometimes the concepts they're learning, they're having a difficult time.
Or maybe they don't test well.
They don't.
Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, so conversation, and that we do a lot of conversing when we're talking about a subject. And they will tell you in conversation whether or not they understand it just by what they're talking about, right? I don't feel that today's tests are a true it doesn't
Measurement.
it doesn't
It's not a good
no,
measurement
it's not a
tool.
true measure as to whether or not they're learning the subject. A lot of kids have a lot of anxiety
Mhm.
approaching a test, and it's teaching them how to overcome that and to get past that in order to test well, knowing that they know the information. There's so much that goes into that. I was never a good test taker.
Mhm.
Never. But I was a
Uh,
great student.
That was me. That was totally me too. And it's interesting that you say that because we just had a conference with my kids' tutoring company, Linda Bell, who I highly recommend it for kids with dyslexia. They're amazing. And I brought in the school, and like that's the thing I love about our school too. Like it's definitely a team approach. And the principal was looking at their end of the grade year testing, and she says, "I can send these to you, but I'm going to tell you, Samuel's not a test taker, and this does not reflect what
What he's
Samuel can do."
Yep.
She says, "So I'll give you the test results, but I'm going to let you know that this boy definitely is further, way further than what this is saying." Because it was below it. It was right at the lowest of the average, if you would.
Mhm.
And yet they haven't changed their testing style since I took the Iowa test back in the day. Okay. Say, I mean, I think the only thing that's ever changed was the subjects of them, but it's like still the same way they test. And I too was not a test taker. And the thing is that this is what's creating the anxiety in our kids. One of the
It
things, not, and there's
is.
other things, but they're more concerned on are they going to do it in the amount of time and are they going to get them correct
Right.
versus focusing on what is the question asking?
Yeah.
What is the question asking? They're not even concerned, and their mind goes to like, "Oh my god, I'm going to run out of time, or I'm not going to get it right," and so that they
Yeah.
they just have all this anxiety,
Panic.
and then they can't think of, and they knew the answer because as
Yeah.
soon as we talk about it, he's like, "But I knew that," and I said, "Well, you didn't put it down," and he's like, "But I thought I did." You know what? And he probably did, but
Yeah.
he was so in panic of, "Am I going to do it in the amount of time? Am I going
Right.
to get the right answer?" So where
So
focus goes, that's where it stays. It's focused on getting
yeah.
it right versus like focused on the actual question.
So for oh my gosh, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 years, we were with a charter school.
Mm.
And so there are different routes that you can take when you're homeschooling. Right now, we file a private school affidavit, so it's just us, right? With the charter school, every year they had to take a state test, and they freaked out every single time. I'm like, "You guys, it's just a test. You're not getting graded on it." And basically, that test is let's get the butts in the chair so that we can get funding for the charter for the following year, right? And every time they took the test, I kind of sat next to them and didn't hold their hand through it, but I was there as their support, right? And I'm like, you got this, you got this. And there was assessment tests they took at the beginning and the end of the year too. Every single time they took the test, it was the exact same passages, and they were dry and they were boring.
Mhm.
And one poet was quoted as saying, she said, there was one that where they were like, "What did the poet think when she was writing? But da 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 da." Da?" And then the poet saw this, and one learned that they were using her poetry without her permission,
Oh,
and two, I didn't even know what I was thinking when I wrote that. It rhymed. So they're asking these kids what was in the head of the poet when they wrote this, and even the poet didn't know when they wrote it, you know?
oh my gosh, it's
So
so funny.
stuff like that is just infuriating for me with test taking, you know?
Right,
What
right.
do you think this means? Not what do you think the author was thinking when they wrote that? What does that mean to you when you read that?
So how are they grading the opinion then if it's not a fact?
Exactly.
Point taken, right?
Yep.
And that's just are we teaching our kids opinions? Are we teaching them facts? I mean,
Yeah.
you know, education has definitely changed. I am working with a family right now, and the daughter doesn't have her cell phone, for reasons that the parents chose to, make it more of a reward. And but they said, "What are we going to do when school starts?" And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean? What you're going to do when school starts?" Like, she doesn't need her phone. Oh no, she needs her phone. She needs to scan to go into the lunchroom. She needs to scan her attendance. I'm like, "You're kidding me. You're kidding me." So it's like
Really?
the school is now forcing to have a type of device in order to check into school and check out your books and all this other stuff. And I was like, what happened to regular roll call that the teacher took?
Hard.
Yep. Or ID card or no, I mean, I have to ask myself, I have no idea how we survived the 70s and 80s and 90s. Like I have no idea. I have no idea how we survived them without electronics.
We
I
always
mean,
had quarters.
I
What's that?
remember
That is a payphone.
I mean, I have to tell my kids, my son, I just did a meme the other day or a post, I guess. It was supposed to be a meme, but it was like him holding the VCR tape and going, and he literally asked me, he's like, what's this? And I'm like, that's how we used to watch movies. You know, that's what Blockbuster had back in the day.
And then they're like, what's a Blockbuster?
Right? Right? And it was funny because I think it's one of those DVD thingies. No, it was pre-DVD. Pre-DVD. And you know, it's interesting because I remember in 5th grade, we got the computer lab and there were these big boxes and this DOS thing that would, you know, have to load DOS and you had to put that floppy disk in and take that floppy disk out just to play Oregon Trails or Lemonade Stand. And we were so excited with the Apple II computers. And then when they started talking about the World Wide Web, the World Wide Web, it's going to be this amazing thing. And like everything, there's some great things about it and there's not so great things about it. But now our kids are forced in it. They are calling handwriting script now. It's called script. Yeah. I'm like, because my kids, because I write them notes in their lunch every day. And they're like, Mom, you always write script. I said, I do? I write script? What is script? I thought it was like some cool thing.
Fancy.
And they're like, and they show me the card. I'm like, honey, that's handwriting.
Yeah.
And it's
cursive.
Yeah. They're like, Mom, it's script. And I'm like, cursive? Yeah, Mom, it's script. And I'm like, could you read it? And they're like, yeah, I can read it. And I'm like, then we're good.
Yeah.
When we learned how to do handwriting in 3rd grade, we weren't allowed to print again. Mm-mm. You know, we were not typing our papers because none of us had word processors or typewriters. You know, our parents had a typewriter and it's like we weren't allowed to touch it.
No.
And now everything is in print and everything you need to print out. And it is just crazy. So I'm curious, in the homeschool world, do you guys teach this new form of script, as they call it?
I teach cursive.
Okay.
Because I want my kids, when they go to get their driver's license, to know how to sign their name and not print it out.
Yes.
It's interesting because I think about, you know, technology has been really great for some kids. Mm-hmm. Some kids, they have a really hard time writing dysgraphia, right?
Right.
Transferring what's in here onto the page. One of the people that I follow a lot, and I consider her like the guru of the homeschool world, or like the Tony Robbins of the homeschool world. And her name is Julie Bogart. She's got great programs for kids of all types, writers of all types. But she talks very specifically about, you know, if your child can't write it for them. They can tell you the story and you write it down and then you read it back to them. And then they see what they've thought on paper, and it gets them inspired and excited to learn and write and create that way. If they're not, you know, great at handwriting, have them type it. If they can't type yet, have them speak to type. There's so many different ways that you can have them still do their assignment or write or anything like that. So that is one way in which technology has been beautiful for a lot of kids.
I agree 100%. You know, I had, you know, when I was saying my previous life, because it seems that way. So when I was a developmental specialist and I worked with kids on the spectrum, you know, I've been working with kids for over 23 years on the autism spectrum. And I had one family locally where I live, and they said, we're pulling them out. We're going to homeschool. I said, you're going to homeschool your kid? She's like, I can give more value to my child who's on the spectrum than what they're giving. What is 15 minutes of this and that going to do for my child when I could figure out this is how he learns? He's tactile and visual learner. Yeah. So I'm going to give him things that he can feel and that he can repeat and say. And he's a creature of habit. So I know his routine. I know that I know how to keep him calm. So I'm not spending most of my days doing behaviors. I'm actually teaching him. I know I can get him interested. I know what he loves to do and what he's interested in. So I can make a whole program out of what he loves. So it's the same stuff that you were saying.
Yeah.
And she was so successful, and she created this whole homeschool co-op here in the area. So there was other, and that's when I started to hear about homeschool and stuff. And I was like, oh, you guys are brave. You're brave. Because again, it's that fear, like you said, I'm not a teacher. How am
Yeah.
I going to do this? And, kids are, if your kids aren't independent, does that mean I have to sit with them all day? So what about those parents that are working? How could they incorporate homeschool and still work a job?
So here's the thing. I've got a friend of mine who she and her husband are both physicians, and they have a live-in nanny. So they both have high-end jobs, right? So they're getting paid enough so that they can afford a nanny. And any kind of work that the nanny can't do with them, that the kids can't do independently, they do when they're home.
Mm,
They do it when they get home, or they do it on the weekends, or we've got friends that we know that are they're on the ice skating path. They want to be an Olympian, and so they're on the rink all day long, and then on their breaks they're up there doing school with their parents.
nice.
um I know people who they're waitresses, and they are still homeschooling their kids.
Right.
And
So
it's
there's a
just,
way to do it.
there is a way to do it. You make it work. If you really want to do it, there's a way to do it.
I love it. I love it.
And
Okay. And the last,
it's getting that community to help you too. It's
absolutely,
really
it's a
important
village.
to have that community.
It takes a village. It does. It
Yeah.
definitely does. I always say that. So one last question, then we're going to wrap it up because we're almost at time. So what about the families that feel, but what about college? Do you feel there's any deficit of getting into college if you've been homeschooled?
Not at all. In fact, there was a study that just showed that colleges are seeking out homeschool kids because they are self-learners and they're self-motivated, even more so than the kids that are in traditional school.
Wow.
So,
So one of the things that I love that you said was that it doesn't matter, you may have a great school and great teachers and it may be working for you, and that's amazing. The
mhm.
reason why I brought Sam on is because there's always another option. And I think that if we can get past these fears that we've talked about today, and as Sam has helped us debunk them, I mean, she helped me debunk them a couple years ago. And and that's why I wanted to bring her on here, is because I just want to have this real raw conversation with you listeners out there that who, feel like they don't have a choice, and to know that you do have a choice. So Sam, if you can leave us with any last thoughts, what would you want to tell our listeners?
Um, Trust in yourself, trust in the relationship that you have with your kids, and know that it's a process. It's a learning process, for you and for them. And it's possible. It really is possible for anyone. Um, you just gotta love them.
Mm, I love it. I love it. And I would just add on to that, be curious and not critical, as I always say in all my shows, especially with what our children need. Be open to hear them. If they're failing, find out what's going on from them, not the teacher. You know,
Yeah.
figure out, is it the subject? Is it a skill? Is it something socially that's closing them? Something's going on where they're closed, that they can't open and receive the information to, put it back in the correct form, if you would, on a test. So, just be curious, not critical. And like Sam said, just love them and
Mm,
know you're not doing it wrong. The perfect parent is that imperfect parent. We do what we can with what we know, and it takes a village.
yep.
So thank you, Sam, so much for being a part of this show today. This show can also be heard on Spanglish Radio Network. Please check out www.spanglishworld.ca for all the news and programming. Spanglish World, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it.